Review at cspan.org. And there's also a link at our website to the GOP proposal to prevent the fiscal cliff from happening in January. Going live now to the House, just one bill on the agenda to eliminate a requirement that financial institutions send out privacy notices.
From West Virginia, seek recognition.
Madam Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 5817.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 5817, a bill to amend the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act to provide an exception to the annual privacy notice requirement.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentlewoman from West Virginia, Ms. Capito, and the gentleman from California, Mr. Sherman, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from West Virginia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that all members will have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and to add extraneous material on this bill.
Without objection.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you. I would first like to thank Mr. Lichtmeyer and Mr. Sherman for authoring the bill before the House today. I would also like to thank Mr. Lichtmeyer for his hard work on the Financial Institution and Consumer Credit Subcommittee, where he has championed many initiatives to provide common-sense regulatory relief for small financial institutions. The House of Representatives has already passed one bill to remove an outdated requirement for duplicative disclosure of ATM fees on the machine. Common-sense reform. I urge our colleagues in the Senate to pass both of these bills to provide this common-sense regulatory relief for banks and credit unions across the country. I know Mr. Lichtmeyer shares my concerns that in recent years, federal financial regulatory agencies have piled on more regulations without properly assessing the current regulatory regime to remove outdated and unnecessary and overly burdensome regulation. Last year, members of our House Financial Services Committee urged the Treasury Secretary to make good on a promise from the summer of 2010 to take care, as the Dodd-Frank Act was implemented, to ensure that federal agencies conducted a thorough assessment of the current regulatory structure to ensure this opportunity to truly modernize and streamline the federal code. We wanted to make sure this opportunity was not missed. Although Secretary Geithner claims that this streamlining is a priority, we've really seen very little progress on this front. But H.R. 5817 provides an example of how both sides can come together, and I would like to thank Mr. Sherman for his work on this as well, come together to identify outdated and duplicative regulatory requirements. Under current law, financial institutions are required to provide annual privacy notices to their customers that explain all of their information and practices. Financial institutions are required to mail those notices regardless of whether or not that information sharing practices have changed. These annual mailings cost millions of dollars each year and do not provide consumers with new information if the financial institution has not changed their practice. The legislation before us today will require a financial institution to provide annual privacy notices only if they have changed privacy policies that affect the customer. This is an important common-sense bill that will provide further clarity to customers and consumers and eliminate an unnecessary regulatory burden for our financial institutions. Again, I would like to thank Mr. Lichtmeyer and Mr. Sherman for their leadership on this issue, and I would like to reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
I thank the gentlelady from West Virginia for yielding to me, and I yield myself so much time as I may consume in support of H.R. 5817, the Eliminate Privacy Notice Confusion Act. I want to thank Representative Lichtmeyer for his work in introducing this bill. I've enjoyed working with him on it. Ms. Speaker, this is common-sense legislation that makes a minor change to our banking laws to revise a very costly and unnecessary requirement that financial institutions such as banks and credit unions and other depository institutions must send each of their customers a copy of their privacy policy every year, even when that policy hasn't changed from the prior year when they got the same exact privacy notice notification. For banks, credit unions, and other financial institutions of all sizes, this means spending a small fortune to reprint millions of complicated and long documents, then mailing them to every consumer, even when there's been no change in the policy. It is disadvantageous not only because of the time and cost in mailing these and the trees that are no doubt consumed, but also because customers have no way to separate the wheat from the chaff. They're getting these notices every year from every financial institution with whom they have dealings without any indication as to whether there's been a change from the privacy policy that they received just a year ago. By sending out less, we attract attention to those situations where there's been a change in the privacy policy. Our bill makes a simple fix to this problem, requiring financial institutions to provide their customers with this additional notification only when there's been a change that affects the policy or practice as it relates to that consumer. As a result, consumers will know that the privacy notices that arrive in their mailbox actually require their attention. And banks, credit unions, other financial institutions that have been spending millions of dollars to mail out duplicative notices and redundant notifications each year can redirect those savings back to providing for the consumer, to their community, or to loans to help our economy grow. Madam Speaker, I want to thank, as I did at the beginning of my presentation, our colleague and co-sponsor, or chief sponsor of this bill, Representative Luetkemeyer of Missouri, and thank him for his leadership on this issue. I also want to thank our longtime colleague, ranking member of our Financial Services Committee, Barney Frank, for his work in getting us to this point where we can consider this bill on the floor today. I will, in short order, be asking for a recorded vote on this bill, not because it needs a recorded vote, but because I've been informed by my leadership that it is important to this House and that we have time on the floor tomorrow to confer with each other on members and that we have a sufficient number of recorded votes. And so my colleagues should not interpret my request for a recorded vote as any statement that this bill is something we have to go on record or that I would disagree with the outcome of any voice vote, but simply as an act of collegiality, showing that I think we ought to spend more time with each other on this floor tomorrow, and I know we will all enjoy that process. With that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from California reserves. The gentlewoman from West Virginia is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would like to yield as much time as he wishes to consume from the principal sponsor of this bill, a great member of the Financial Services Committee, Mr. Luetkemeyer from Missouri.
The gentleman from Missouri is recognized for such time as he may consume.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Chairman Capito, for yielding. Also want to thank Mr. Sherman for his fine remarks, and we certainly will take no offense to a recorded vote and will not oppose that. We understand and support collegiality among ourselves, especially in this time when it seems to be more partisan and toxic than it is friendly. So no problem there, Representative. I rise today in strong support of H.R. 5817, the Eliminate Privacy Notice Confusion Act. I introduced this legislation earlier this year in an effort to reduce yet another unnecessary burden facing consumers and financial institutions alike. Under current law, financial institutions of all sizes are required to provide annual privacy notices explaining information sharing practices to all customers. Banks and credit unions are required to give these notices each year, even if their privacy policies have not changed in the slightest. This creates not only waste for financial institutions, but confusion among and increased indirect costs to consumers. H.R. 5817 would require institutions to provide privacy policy information to the customers only if they've changed any policy or practice related to that the customer's privacy. This bill would eliminate millions of costly, confusing, and often ignored mailings that cost millions of dollars to produce each year. And with passage of this bill, information included in these mailings would likely be more significant to the consumer because they would only come after a change in the privacy policy. Again, I want to remind my colleagues that this legislation specifically ensures the financial institution cannot be exempted from annual privacy notices if that institution changes in any way its policies or practices related to the disclosure of non-public personal information. This legislation is supported by the Independent Community Bankers of America, the Credit Union National Association, the American Bankers Association, and the National Association of Federal Credit Unions, among others. Again, I want to thank the gentleman from California, Mr. Sherman, for his fine support and fine work and his good work on this issue. Also want to thank Chairman Baucus, Ranking Member Frank, Chairwoman Capito, and Ranking Member Maloney for their assistance in ensuring that this legislation passes without delay. This common sense legislation has garnered widespread bipartisan support, and I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting its passage. With that, Madam Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Take a minute to put into the record the statements of Adam Levitin, professor of law at the Georgetown University Law School, in support of this bill. And he came before our committee in May of 2012 and stated there are unquestionably financial regulations that do little other than add to regulatory burdens. He cited in particular the provision that this bill addresses and said, I would also urge the elimination of the privacy disclosure requirement, even if there is no substantive replacement for it. But then he added, and at very least eliminate the requirement of an annual disclosure when there has been no change to the policy. I couldn't agree more with the professor, and with that I reserve the balance of my time, unless the gentleman from Massachusetts, who is right here, wishes me to yield to him. I just saw that he re-entered the chamber. And
does the gentleman from California yield for parliamentary
inquiry? I yield for a parliamentary inquiry, yes. Ed, is 4 minutes enough?
Madam Speaker.
The gentleman from California is recognized.
4 minutes to the gentleman from Massachusetts.
The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized for 4 minutes.
I thank the gentleman very much. The language which is in question here is language which was spurred by Mr. Barton and I in 1999 as part of the consideration of the Gramm-Leach-Bliley bill. The language had, for privacy, none had been included in the Senate, none had been included in the rest of the process. But as the bill came to the Energy and Commerce Committee in 1999, Mr. Barton and I, we added privacy language, believing that as companies are able to consolidate banking records, insurance records, brokerage records, the physical examinations of customers and their medical secrets, that there should be privacy here. We were no longer talking about just going into a bank and having old Mr. Wentworth there that you and your family had known your entire life, and you trusted Mr. Wentworth, and there was actually a whole long family history. That is no longer the case. We're now basically living in a world where we've moved from an era of privacy keepers to privacy peepers and data mining reapers, trying to create profiles of people using all of their financial information as a way of basically making their companies more efficient, but simultaneously compromising the privacy of families all across our country. And so, while ultimately the language which Mr. Barton and I included on the House side on Gramm-Leach-Bliley was watered down in the final compromise, that's the privacy that's in the bill. And so one of the things, of course, that I believed and Mr. Barton believed was that people should get the information, that their privacy could be compromised by these now huge mega banks. And so what this bill is saying is you don't have to notify people of that each year. You don't have to tell them. If they didn't figure that out when the bank first signed you up as a company, they never have to tell you again because they notified you once, right there in the beginning. No, ladies and gentlemen. The amount of information which we get at home from these banks, massive, as you know. You open up your mailbox every day and there's like 25 solicitations from financial institutions all across the country. They got loads of money to do that. Loads of money. You look at their TV commercials, loads of money. You're in safe hands when you give your family's wealth over to that financial institution. But if you ask them to just provide a scintilla of information on what privacy rights they have in terms of protecting all of their family secrets inside of that financial information, the banks say, oh no, that's too expensive. We can't do that. How can you afford that? And so this just gets right back to the same argument that we had during Graham Leach Bliley, same exact debate, same exact terms. And all I can tell you is there's a looming privacy catastrophe coming in this country. People just don't understand the full consequences of what this new cyber world makes possible in terms of the compromise of information. You know, when you're writing out the information to buy the Ritalin for your child, that's a check that the bank has. There it is. You know, you haven't told anyone else in your family that you have a daughter who needs it. All of this has to be told to the public on an ongoing basis. I urge a no vote. I urge a no vote on this suspension.
The gentlewoman from West Virginia is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to yield 2 minutes to my friend from Texas, Mr. Barton.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank you, and I want to thank the gentlelady from West Virginia for her courtesy. She didn't have to do this since I'm in opposition to the bill, and I appreciate it. I also want to apologize to the Speaker. I should have known better that I had to be here at the beginning of the debate to claim time in opposition, so I have been reminded of that. I am in opposition to this bill, although it is very well-meaning and well-intentioned. Who could be opposed to saving some money to our struggling financial institutions when they have to send out these privacy notices? And for the smaller institutions, there's no question that they're very expensive. The problem is that you can't just give away your privacy rights. And while this bill does nothing about the underlying issue of privacy, it does at least require that once a year banks and financial institutions subject to Graham Leach Bliley inform people that there are some privacy protections in the law. I don't think they're very strong. I think they need to be upgraded, and Congressman Markey and I, who are co-chairman of the Bipartisan Privacy Caucus, have legislation that does that. Having said that, we should not willingly give up our privacy protections that we have, and this bill would eliminate a requirement of notification, which is, I admit, not the same as reducing the privacy that is in the law, but when you start down that slippery slope that you don't have to notify of privacy protection, the next step is to not even have privacy at all. So I do oppose this bill, respectfully so, and would ask for a no vote when we call for the yeas and nays. Again, I want to thank the gentlelady for her courtesy and commend the sponsor for his efforts on the bill. And with that, I yield back, Madam Speaker.
The gentleman from Texas yields back. The gentleman from California is recognized.
I rise again in support of this bill, and I yield to no member in terms of my dedication to privacy. If this bill passes, you're going to get notification of what the privacy rules are when you start with the financial institution. You're going to get notified every time they make a change, and you're going to be notified any day of the night or day when you simply go onto the website and look at the required privacy notification. When Graham Leach Bliley was passed, Not everybody had access to the Internet. I realize today not everybody does, but a much larger percentage of Americans are familiar with the Internet, have access to the Internet, and know that if they want to see the privacy notification, the privacy rules of their financial institution, it's there on the Internet in a way that most Americans are going to have easy access to. The idea that you're mailed a copy of something you've already been mailed a copy of that hasn't changed, that does little or nothing to provide additional privacy, except we can say, oh, we're for privacy. If we want to protect the privacy of our constituents, we ought to do so in a meaningful way, not simply say the same thing you got a copy of a year ago today that is available to you any time of the day or night is something we're going to chop down some more trees and send you a copy of again, and that's the best idea we can come up with to protect your privacy. I think instead we ought to pass this bill, know that we've given everybody a copy of the privacy on paper, that the privacy policy of the financial institution, that they get another paper notice if there's any change, and continuing notice on the Internet every day of the year, every night of the year. With that, I would yield one minute to the gentleman from Massachusetts.
For the record, for anyone who's listening, the American Civil Liberties Union opposes this, the American Library Association opposes this, the Consumer Union, the Liberty Coalition opposes this. The Patients Privacy Act Coalition opposes this. And the reason is this. You sign up with a bank 10 years ago, Mega Bank Incorporated. They send you a privacy notice. Then every year, for the next 10 years, they buy a new entity that locks right in as an affiliate. And you've already signed off on everything they do, but they don't have to notify you that this new entity, this new affiliate, is going to have a totally new use for that information. But you're supposed to have, in 2002, have already been notified. Moreover, ladies and gentlemen, why can't they just email this notice each year to people? Why can't they just email it to people? Here's your privacy. And every year it goes out, no trees chopped down, nothing done that affects the environment, just everybody gets the email each year. Here's your privacy rights. And it goes in a separate email so that everyone is really getting the opportunity to single it out. It doesn't cost anything. It gives everyone all the information they need.
I thank the gentleman for his presentation. Would be happy to co-sponsor legislation to require email notification once a year to every customer who's willing to provide their email address to the financial institution. There were some who would say, I don't want to give my email address to my financial institution, but everybody willing to provide that email, I couldn't agree with you more. If this was done by email, it ought to be done at least annually, and I look forward to joining with the members who are here in this room and are interested in this in requiring annual email notification. I don't know if the sponsor of the bill would be interested in that, but I would join the gentleman from Massachusetts in legislation on that. But let's act today to end the expensive and resource-consuming annual paper notification. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from California reserves. The gentlewoman from West Virginia is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to yield as much time as he consumes. The gentleman from Missouri, principal sponsor of the legislation.
The gentleman from Missouri is recognized for such time as he may consume.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Chairwoman Capito. Just to respond to some of the comments that have been made. First, I want to thank the gentleman from Massachusetts and the gentleman from Texas for their work on the privacy notice and protection of our private information. Extremely important, and I applaud those efforts and I support those efforts. If you look at this particular bill, this is not an effort to thwart any sort of ability for people to protect their private information. Within the privacy law, there's all sorts of other protections. It doesn't change one single dot or of an I or a cross of a T on the rest of the notification that's there, whether it deals with the kind of information you can collaborate on or the kind of information that you can be a part of. All it does is to say that the notification that is supposed to be required annually is not made unless there is a change. Now, the gentleman from Massachusetts made some comments with regards, Madam Speaker, to the amount of mail that he gets from the banks. That's not necessarily something that is the compliance area. It's called marketing. Whenever they're trying to market for their credit cards or market for their services, that's part of their marketing budget. And that's where those dollars come from, to be able to do those things. That's part of being a business. When it comes time for the changes that have to be notified, when an individual is notified, whenever you merge another bank or another institution with others, and you're one of the individuals whose institution was bought out, you will receive a new notice because, quite frankly, obviously there will be a change in the information that's going to be held by the banks. You'll be notified of that because it is a significant change. So I'm not sure that the gentlemen that have spoken opposition have quite thought through their arguments. Basically, all we're doing is allowing for some bookkeeping things to be done here. We're not impacting the individual's privacy at all. I think if you went on the street and you asked 10 people whether they thought this was a good idea or not, I would guarantee you, I think there would be at least 9, and probably the one would be, well, I can take it either way. I don't see any opposition from the consumers themselves whenever they're actually paying for these notices through higher charges to their bank accounts. So I think that there's a lot of good that we're trying to do here. We're not trying to change the world. All we're trying to do is continue to protect the integrity of the information that the banks and credit unions are holding on these individuals and provide the ability of those institutions to do it in a more effective and cost-effective manner. With that, Madam Chair, I yield back. Or Madam Speaker, I yield back. Thank you.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California is recognized.
I would just state that I agree with the gentleman from Massachusetts that we ought to require email notification of what the privacy policy is annually as a good compromise. I would hope that some of the others here on the floor would take a minute to comment on that, or I would yield to them. Obviously, such an email could be sent only to those customers who voluntarily provide their email address to the financial institution. But when you look at the idea of an expensive postal mailing, using resources to provide an exact copy of something that was previously mailed on hard copy or in hard copy on paper to the same consumer a year earlier, on balance, that is not a good use of societal resources, nor a good use of most consumers' time. I think the fact that these policies are up on the web and available whenever somebody takes an interest in them is also important. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Does the gentleman
reserve.
have any more speakers? Because I'm prepared to close if you're prepared to.
I have no speakers. I would just add that there are many of us who are dedicated to privacy, but not every privacy requirement makes sense. Here is a case where people are notified on paper. And finally, I want to address the gentleman from Massachusetts' comment that maybe when you were notified on paper your financial institution only had 2 or 3 subsidiaries, and 10 years later they have several more subsidiaries with whom they may share information. But the fact is that isn't disclosed in another copy of the financial institution's privacy policies. So it may in fact be that your financial institution is offering more products, sharing your information with more subsidiaries. But voting down this bill is not a solution to that issue. What is a solution is to have a policy where you have to send it in writing once, send it in writing when it changes, provide it on the web, and I would join with others, I hope, in introducing legislation requiring annual email distribution. With that, I have no speakers. I have no further comments. I have asked, I believe, that the statement of Professor Levitin be included in the record, and
without objection.
With that, I yield back my time.
The gentleman from California yields back. The gentlewoman from West Virginia is recognized.
Thank you. I recognize myself just to simply close to say that privacy is an issue that's a concern to all of us. And in this new ways of communicating that we have, and we can only imagine in our future, I think it becomes more and more difficult. I would respond to the gentleman from California when he says the email notices. I haven't discussed it with the bill's sponsor. I mean, I wouldn't have an objection to that. However, many of us live in areas where the penetration of email is not like it is in California or Massachusetts or probably areas of Texas. So there's a long way to go before that could be. But maybe next time this is debated in 10 years or whatever, that would be the norm. So I would make sure that that option for those who want to receive the paper can still do this. But you know, I think we're overcomplicating this issue, quite frankly. I think it is a common sense revision. If we took the gentleman's 10 people that he met on the street and said, what would you think if we didn't mail these, if the bank didn't mail these privacy notices to you every year, if he further questioned them and asked them how many actually read these, point by point, and I'm putting myself in this category, is probably very small as well. Not to say that it doesn't need to be publicly available, and when changes are made we have to have public notification. I agree with that. But I do believe, serving on the Financial Services Committee, I think it's become very apparent when you talk to institutions and when you talk to customers that the piling on of new regulations without weeding out some of these old regulations that have either been antiquated or duplicative or repetitive or wasteful or whatever is burdening not just the institutions, burdening the customer too. And Lisa, you know, I think I'm not sure it gets the wanted understanding of what's going on to the customer that we're trying to achieve here. So I do believe it's been
I would ask
complicated, and I would.
Well, I'd
yes.
ask you to yield for just so I can let our colleagues know that substantially this bill was passed by the House as part of a package in March 8, 2006. That this bill was pretty much in this exact form was passed by this House June 24, 2008 as part of a package, and then finally as a separate bill, H.R. 3506 was passed by this House on April 14, 2010. So the House has a strong record of passing this legislation. I hope we continue to do so, and I thank the gentleman for yielding.
Well, I thank the gentleman for bringing that up. I think it's an important point. And with that, I would urge support of this bill, and with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 5817? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Madam Speaker, on that I demand the yeas and nays.
Yeas and nays are requested. All those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20 and the Chair's prior announcement, further proceedings on this motion will be postponed. The Chair lays before the House a communication.
The Honorable the Speaker, House of Representatives. Sir, pursuant to the permission granted in Clause 2H of Rule 2 of the Rules of the U.S. House of Representatives, the Clerk received the following message from the Secretary of the Senate on December 3, 2012 at 3:08 p.m. that the Senate passed Senate 2170, that the Senate agreed to Senate Resolution 607. With best wishes, I am, signed sincerely, Karen L. Haas.
The Chair will entertain requests for 1 minute. For what purpose does the gentleman from Oregon rise?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the chamber for 1 minute.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to ask Labor Secretary Hilda Solis a simple question on behalf of the farmers of Oregon. When will we get answers about the department's heavy-handed enforcement tactics? In August, my colleagues and I from the Oregon delegation, Republicans and Democrats alike, wrote to the Secretary about reports that the Department of Labor had been discarding rights of due process and appeal in using hot goods orders to enforce labor laws on farms in the Pacific Northwest. So far, we're still waiting for a written response 108 days later. We know the Department can move with great speed when it wants to, when it's trying to shut down a farm with little due process or appeal. So why does it take so long to get answers for Oregon farmers? Again, I ask the Secretary to clarify in writing the Department of Labor's procedures for due process after a farm inspection. Certainly no one is advocating for unfair labor practices, but our farmers deserve due process and a clear understanding of what to expect from an investigation. Only the Department of Labor can provide these answers to Oregon's congressional delegation and the citizens we represent. 108 days later, we and they still do not have those written answers, and that is simply unacceptable.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
Madam Speaker, I rise to address the House for 1 minute and seek unanimous consent to revise and send my remarks.
The gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, I rise in strong support of freshman sensation Johnny Football Manziel's quest to become the first freshman to win the Heisman Trophy. He is a redshirt freshman quarterback at Texas A&M, has led the Texas Aggies to a 10-2 record this year, losing only to Florida, who is currently ranked number 3 in the nation, and to LSU, who I believe is currently ranked number 7 in the nation. He has broken the record for total offense not once but twice this year in the Southeastern Conference. His total offense for the year exceeds that of both Cam Newton of Auburn and Tim Tebow of Florida when they were playing, and they both won the Heisman trophies in their year. Texas A&M is going to play Oklahoma in the Cotton Bowl on January the 7th. It would be supreme blessing if the Heisman Trophy voters for the first time were to vote for Johnny Football Manziel, quarterback of the Fighting Texas Aggies. And with that, Madam Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
I'm wearing myself out working this afternoon, Madam Speaker. I move that the House do now adjourn.
The question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow for morning hour debate.
The House today debated a bill that would end the requirement that financial institutions send customers privacy notices every year. Negotiations continue off the floor.